What a day. Phyllis, thank you so much for being on with us today. Is it now? I'm really bad at names. I'm going to try your last name. Is it Levitt?
Leavitt.
Levitt. I was very close.
Right.
I'm known
Very
for not
close.
getting names right, but I was right on the
No
teeter there.
problem.
Phyllis, thank you so much for being with us. As you can see, New York City is a mess today, and we seem to have a downpour that went from nice to trickle to I don't know what it is now, and it's spring, and it might have been snowing at some point. Global warming is a thing, people. I'm just telling you, it is a
Right,
thing.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Hopefully, it's better weather where you are, so you have to deal with that.
It's beautiful where I am. I'm in New Mexico right now.
Oh,
It's about 60 degrees and sunny.
I'm jealous, Phyllis. I'm very jealous. Thank you so much for being on the show. We have some good topics to talk about. We're gonna talk about your book, America in Therapy. We're going to talk a little bit about the leading cause of mental health illness and how we handle that in America today, and some of the best principles and practices for breaking the cycle of abuse and violence, and a couple of the topics. So, Phyllis, give us a quick synopsis of yourself, your quick elevator pitch, and kind of tell us why did you write America in Therapy?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, I went to therapy myself when I was in my 30s for the first time of really looking at myself through a psychological lens. I was at a really hard time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I really had no idea because I wasn't brought up with any understanding of psychology or our emotions. I really had no idea that our childhood and the influences around us and our conditioning have so much to do with how we feel about ourselves, what our reaction patterns are, the kinds of things and people that we're attracted to, and the
Mm-hmm.
places where we might feel stuck, as well as if we have a great upbringing that we might, really flourish and thrive. And I had some trauma in my early life, and it kind of all began to unravel when I was in my mid 30s. And I started reading books on psychology and going to therapy, and I decided to go back to school and get a degree myself. And I worked for a couple of years in a sexual abuse treatment program. And then I just went into private practice, and I was in private practice for well over 30 years. And what I began to see, a lot of therapy today is really focused on our family systems and the influences of our family systems. I think we no longer really believe that people are islands and they just come into this world either screwed up or not.
Yeah.
That what we experience with the people around us, particularly with the people we depend on, but also in our larger communities now, the influences of our larger communities, the role models for behavior, the role models for love and belonging or conflict resolution, they influence all of us for better or for worse. And I just began to see that family systems apply on all levels, all the way up to our government. And if our government is in some ways mirroring dynamics that I would call abuse family dynamics or neglectful family dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
then thousands and millions of people are affected by that, just like children or spouses in their own homes are affected by dysfunction, abuse, and neglect. And I felt like I needed to write about that because I think that's a lot of what's going on today.
It is, yeah, and it's so great. And how has the kind of response been from the book? And have you had stories, or has anyone really been touched by this, or kind of be like, "Wow, this is kind of me, and this is how I feel," and I'm so great to kind of feel like I'm not alone in this process.
Yeah, so where I am with my book is that it's actually not live yet. It's going to be published on July 2nd of this year, 2024.
July
And
2nd.
so the people that have responded to the book are people that I've given the book to,
Oh, nice.
and which is, a number of people. And then I've been on really probably somewhere between 75 and 100 podcasts talking to
Wow.
people about the contents of my book and the message of my book. And the response has been amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
just amazing response. People are, I think people are relieved. I think they want to know. I think we want to know, like, what
Yeah.
ails us and what we can actually do about it. And if one person can go to therapy and have a healing experience from trauma or neglect or abuse or discrimination or whatever they've suffered from,
Hmm.
and really come out the other side and begin to thrive and have a deeper understanding of themselves, then we can all do that if we have the opportunity, if we have the skills, if we have help, and we can do it as a country if we have the will. And that's how I see it. If we have the will, and if we understand what's at stake if we don't.
It's true. It'll be a repeated pattern over and over again, and it won't
Exactly.
change, and it'll go from generation to generation. It's we probably have seen happen
It is
over and over.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Over and over.
that's amazing. And in your case and understanding as you went through this process, what are the leading causes of mental health? What are some of the things that are really, besides the family trauma, but what is really happening? Is there social impacts that are happening with this? Is there outside factors that are going on around the world? Like, what's really causing this? And not to say it in a negative way, but like there seems to be patterns of where these things are happening, whether it be with more violence in
Yeah.
the world and
Yeah.
more sexual abuse, more hatred towards one another, and
Right.
instability. Where is this all really coming from? I mean, kind of what do you think in your understanding, your findings of what's happening?
Well, I think that there's many answers to that question, and I'm not going to pretend that I have them all or that I could even remember all the things that I've said about it in this moment. But what I would say to begin with is that one of the things that I've discovered as a therapist, and certainly doing my own work as well, but really working with hundreds and hundreds of people, is that what we suffer from the most as individuals is actually an injury to love and belonging. I
Mm,
don't know anybody who I've worked with who at the heart of their dysfunction, at the heart of the things that are not working for them in their lives, or the ways they feel stuck, or the bad relationships they get in and don't know how to get out of, or the ways they themselves are behaving, let's say with their spouse or children, that they're not proud of, but
yeah,
feel like they can't stop. Um, that when we trace it back to the origins of what happened to them, it's always some form of an injury to love and belonging. That we didn't get the love we needed. It was intermittent. It was too conditional. There were rigid expectations. There were dysfunctional role models that we had to adapt to. There was dysfunction around us that prevented love and belonging to come to us, like
yeah,
addicted parents or parents who were never around or parents who were so injured themselves that they were violent or, um, you know, often, it's interesting how many people I've worked with a lot of overt abuse, like physical and sexual abuse, but I've also worked with a lot of people who the abuse was emotional. The
mm,
messages they got about themselves were, you're not worthy, or you're stupid, or you're fat, or you're ugly, or you'll never amount to anything.
right,
Um, and these are terribly injurious messages because children are little sponges and they absorb what's around them. And if it's negative and if it's demeaning or if it's ostracizing or alienating or in some other way injurious, we absorb that. So, we start in therapy with looking at the origins. What happened to you? What were the most formative experiences? And of
mhm,
course, sometimes there's also really good formative experiences. And those are some of the places that help reinforce our resources that we can count on in the healing process. But a lot of therapy is focused on the negative messages that we got about ourselves, or the painful and difficult experiences that we had that we didn't have a chance to recover from. And
mhm,
so I think we're in the big picture of America. I think we have to look at some of our origins. Who
yeah,
came here? Who settled this country? What did we do when we got here?
yeah,
We just assumed we could take whatever we wanted, and we did. And that's not all that happened in America. There's
sure,
always been amazing, wonderful people that have settled this country, that have invented incredible things, that have formed beautiful communities and treated people well. And there are many ways that we've that we slaughtered Native Americans and took their land and looked down on them, and in some ways still do. The Black people that we enslaved, is a tragedy beyond words, that we're still suffering from and that we're still recreating in many ways, even though we don't have those particular cotton fields anymore, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so we have to be accountable. A lot of therapy focuses on the difficult things that happen to us. But
Mhm.
in the process of doing that, I think what happens naturally for people is if I'm in a safe place to really explore the hurtful things that happen to me, I'm very likely to also want to be accountable for the hurtful things I've done. And I think
Wow.
that's one of the beautiful gifts of the best psychotherapy. And that's part of what I would love to bring to the conversation of America. You know, because we've hurt a lot of people, and we hurt a lot of people today.
Yeah.
And I call that, I'm just going to segue really quick to one other thought, and then please jump back in.
Yeah.
We've been taught that all of these terrible things that are happening are the result of an ideological, divide and ideological partisan politics. And what I say is that they're signs of mental unwellness. People who hurt other
Mhm.
people and know what they're doing are mentally unwell. And we
Yeah.
know that because when we look at an individual family, if you had a parent that was starving one child or putting them in a room where they knew there were toxins,
Mhm.
or, putting them outside in the cold, or not sending them to school and letting them have a good education, we'd say there was something wrong with that parent.
Mm.
We'd say that there was a mental illness, a disturbance going on, that they were treating their family member that way. And yet there's such a disconnect in our country and in our larger social organizations that we allow and condone and perpetrate things that we would never want to have happen to ourselves or the people we love. And that's a mental unwellness issue. It's not an ideological issue.
Wow. Oh, that's very powerful, and that's so true. What are some of the best principles and practices for breaking the cycle of abuse and violence? I think to myself that people say, "Oh, I won't let the negativity get to me," or maybe the negativity will make me stronger, which may work for some people. Everyone's different,
Right,
totally.
right.
But what can we do to kind of stop this? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about it. It's changing the cycle, but is it taking accountability for your actions and learning from those things? Is it B, taking the steps to realize there is something wrong and really seeking out that help? And C, is it really just kind of thinking that it's an overall holistic view of how you see yourself and how you redefine what it means to be a human and to have a sense of
Right.
humanity? You know, are those some examples
Yeah.
you think are pretty good to kind of have moving forward to kind of help this?
I think they're really good. They're really good things to put in the space. And where I start, and kind of where I start in my book, is I think we need some education. I think the average person doesn't necessarily know what the dynamics of abuse and neglect are. That
Yeah.
perpetrators tend to blame their victims for what they do to them. They justify the abuses that they do to other people by, she wore that short skirt. She was asking for it. He didn't do
Mm,
his homework. I had a right to hit him. Those people in our society are poor and lazy. They don't deserve to, they're lazy because they feel entitled, poor
right.
because they're entitled. These ways that we justify mistreating other people. And that's actually a sign of an abuser or of someone who's dysfunctional, because no one deserves to be abused. And yet we've been taught that certain people are less worthy of being treated well. And so there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And I'll say a couple of quick things, and then we can look at some of the other things that you said.
Yeah.
Um, in abusive families, it's dangerous to tell. It's often really dangerous to go for
Mhm.
help or to tell somebody that you're being hurt,
Yeah.
because if you're not protected by some other outside entity, you're likely to be hurt worse for telling. And
Mhm.
in our society, a lot of people who want to peacefully protest some of the injustices happening are also targeted for mistreatment and arrest and battering by the police. And even
Wow.
though we're supposed to be entitled to the right to peaceful, demonstration.
Yeah.
Um, so some of these dynamics that are happening in abusive families are happening in the family of America, and they're having the same deleterious effects. People, when they're hurt, become symptomatic.
Yeah.
We can't be hurt without either becoming enraged and acting out our rage, or acting in on ourselves and, being self-sabotaging or down on ourselves or isolating or failing to thrive in some ways. And for some people, it's both. They act in and they act out. And we have to know that some of the people that are most symptomatic in our society are actually acting out the pain that's being inflicted on them. They're having a normal response, normal, to abnormal behavior, to
Yeah.
inhuman treatment. And we can't afford to just call them bad and lock them away. We need to look at the family of America the way we look at an individual family and say, is the family of America creating a healthy environment for all people? And if it's not, why not? And
Yeah.
what can we do about it?
Wow. That's so true, because I think a lot of times we try to push away the problem and we don't really face it or really work on it. It's more of like you're damaged, you're broken. And then this has been happening in our society for many years. And it seems to be, it's kind of like almost, we want to say it's kind of a lock bottle where it's like these things are pent up and they're built up and they're
Right,
kind of just staying here. And then all of a sudden it's a catastrophe and it becomes a lot worse, down the road.
right.
And that takes me into kind of our next question, and kind of a mixed wrap up on this is, I mean, what do you think accounts for the escalation of violence and hatred in America today? I mean, we see this with politics, we see it with gun control. It's just sad to see that these things are happening over and over again, but yet, maybe it's going back to what you talked about education. We're still not finding ways to really bridge that gap and really heal and really grow and learn from these things. And we all know tragedy has to happen for any change to ever happen, sadly, politically or
It
any,
seems like that.
you
I
know,
would like that to change, but yes.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like, what is it that, what is accounting for this? Is it indifference with people? Is it just the fact that people are just not willing to look into themselves? Like, why are we just seeing this acts of violence happening so much and more than it happened maybe in the past 20, 30, 40 years?
It really does seem that way. I mean, the news about mass murders is just overwhelming.
Yeah.
Um, and that seems like a new occurrence, that it's so widespread. And I think it's really very telling that these mass murders, it used to be when you read about a murder, it was somebody murdered somebody in their family or a friend that they were angry at or a boss that they hated. And
Right.
now it's just random people. It's
Yeah.
innocent children. And
Yeah.
I think that really is a testimony to how our disconnection from our own humanity is escalating. That
Mm,
that a person's rage would be acted out on people they don't even know.
yeah.
Um, and it's very sad, because what happened to that person? And I think that's one of the things that psychology brings to the table is what happened to the person that disconnected them to such a degree that the only way that they could handle the rage and the pain was to be murderous. Um, and I think that's on us as a society to look at, rather than just keep blaming the perpetrator. The perpetrator is like at the tip of a big iceberg of widespread environmental, national, and really global dysfunction. So what
Yeah.
do I think accounts for that? I mean, I think there's many things. I mean, I think you can factor in that the economy is more and more skewed and people are
Mhm.
more and more stressed.
Yep.
That there seems to be in our news and in some of our most flagrant politics, a condoning of racial and gender and economic violence.
Yep.
Um, but one of the things that I just really want to highlight, and I think there's many factors here. I think social media is a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like
Mm-hmm.
podcasts like this that can go out on social media are fabulous. And there's a wealth of information and sharing that we didn't have access to before, that's immediate and wonderful. I can look up, a symptom of something and get an answer in a
Yeah,
second.
absolutely.
And the downside is that it's a free platform for a lot of misinformation and hatred and targeting of people. So
Yeah,
that's a piece of it. But the part that I really want to emphasize is that I think families are really suffering. I
yeah,
think they're really, really suffering that so many parents are working, more than one job. They're not home for their kids. They can't afford good childcare. They can't afford good housing. They can't afford the kind of medical treatment they might need or the education that their children deserve. And I think that's increasing, that families are under more and more and more stress. And, where does our stress come out? It comes out with the people around us. It comes out at our kids or our spouses
yeah,
or the people in the workplace. And one of the things that I really like to say is that, and I think this is a sign of our collective mental unwellness, that
mm-hmm.
we invest billions of dollars in war and
Oh,
weapons of mass destruction,
yes.
billions of dollars. And if we invested those same dollars in helping families, in providing better housing and better education and better wages and better access to medical treatment,
Mm-hmm.
um, we would have healthier population. We
Yeah,
would have less symptomatic people. Just
yeah,
like in a family, if the parents are providing the very best they can for the basic needs of the people in the family, you're going to have a healthier family.
very true. Yeah, that's so true. And it's you touched on something so great because like that's so true. If you think about it, people, it's not the homes that we grew up in that you used to know or see, what our grandparents had, our parents had. It's,
Right.
I could say from experience, my mom was a single mom. If it wasn't for my grandparents, watching over
Right.
me, taking care of me, it was a lot. And I'm not saying I was a horrible child, a little mischievous, but I think I turned out all right. But I think ideally,
Me
it's
too.
it takes there's something of like taking a village to raise a child because it's so true. Because like nowadays, childcare is not cheap. Maybe back in the day, it was $50 to your local person, or here, then there, or a school costs this much. Nowadays, families have to, like you said, get almost second jobs and things to take care of these kids, and then the kids do feel that neglect at such a young age, as you said, and they have that disconnect at a young age, or they use, which I really find very hard, and I'll get a lot of flack for this. Is like when parents use devices and technology to keep their kids active. It's like
I know.
you gotta actually pay attention to your child. I'm not saying it's all bad. I think it's okay sometimes.
Right.
Educational games, I think those are awesome, great, but they can't be glued to it. They can't just say, "Oh, you're in front of TV. That's it. Oh, here's a device. Here you go." Because they
Right.
disconnect and they're not really connecting with you. And that's a social and I think a reforming thing that like sticks with them as they get older. And COVID didn't help a lot of kids either because they weren't in
Right.
school. You put them in a
Right.
virtual place. Once again, we're
I
taking a break.
totally agree with you. I totally
You know,
agree with you. I think modern technology is another, influence that's a blessing and a curse.
yeah,
For all of those reasons, the bottom line is I think we've become more and more disconnected from one another. And
we
when
have.
people become disconnected from each other, they care less about each other's welfare. And it's
Mhm.
easier to act out on large numbers of people because I don't feel connected to you. And we know in our own lives, when you feel really connected to someone, when you feel love and belonging with them, when you trust them to be
Mhm.
your friend or be there for you don't want to hurt them.
No,
And you wouldn't want to hurt them, and you would try to protect them if you could. So the
absolutely.
more we become disconnected from one another, the more we lose that bond of empathy and caring and concern. And it's just fertile ground for acting out. And so when children don't experience that kind of love and belonging and safety and containment and good
Mm,
boundaries, and all of the things that we associate with mental health and emotional well-being, then they
yeah,
don't have it, and they're
no,
going out into their teenage years without the actual firm emotional foundation that they really need and that they crave. And if
yeah,
they don't get it, they're going to look somewhere for a place to belong. And sometimes it's with the wrong people.
The wrong people, yeah, which was a huge thing, and I think it's still really happening with the human trafficking and everything else, and people falling
Oh,
into pits. And it's like,
totally.
you're looking, and I just, sadly watched one of the documentaries about Quiet on the Set, so all the young kids in the Nickelodeon set, and it
Mm,
was just so sad
mm,
how there's years of abuse have gone on, and all for the sake of a dollar or the sake of entertainment, and it's kind of like it's just condoned because our society seems to think
right,
it's just okay to just be like, okay, well, we'll exploit them. They're just kids. It's okay. They'll bounce back. They'll be fine. But as we just talked about, that's not always the case. That kind of leads into your relationships. That leads into how you handle things in
right,
society. It handles how you handle people in general, like how you interact with someone. How do you go from trusting someone again? So it's like these different levels of that. And not saying you can't get better from it. Obviously, there's therapy for you to help that, and there's certain traumas you can get
right,
over. And you can find that, but we definitely need to find ways to really stop this cycle of violence with one another, and really get back to,
right.
as I mentioned earlier, the love of humanity. So I love the fact you talked about that. Now, what are some of the okay? What changes could be implemented nationally to promote
Yeah.
healing in our great divides, power struggles, armed hostiles? Like, what can we do? Because Phyllis, we're seeing the
Hmm.
world today. We're having things going on in the Middle East. We're having all these things happening in our world. Like, what are we doing to really, or what can we really be doing to stop this cycle of hate and war? And, we think we're doing it under the guise of doing well, but is it really doing well? Is it really helping
Hmm.
doing that?
Hmm. Hmm.
So what,
Well,
what can we do
how can we say it's really helping if thousands of innocent people are dying?
all
It
the time?
can't be.
Yes, yes,
It just
yes.
can't be. But
No.
there's so many things that I think that would contribute to healing, and I think we're actually in a state of crisis because
Hmm.
our investment in weapons of mass destruction and our continued belief in war, whether it's war on a population of people in our own country or outright war on
Yeah.
people in other places, it just perpetuates violence. And the more violence we're going to have. And so I like to bring the principles of good therapy, and I want to bring them to national conversation. In good therapy, and this is going to sound like a no duh, no one ever advocates more violence as a way to heal relationship. Ever. It
Probably
would
not.
be ridiculous if we told people to go home and fight more, or we tell them how to call each other more names, or hit each other, or slam doors.
Right.
It would be ridiculous. But we're doing this on larger and larger levels of our communities and our countries, and condoning it and thinking it's the way to go. So our thinking is outdated, and unfortunately, it's profitable for a lot of people. And
Yeah,
I think that's one of the things that keeps it going. War is a very profitable business for
it
too
is.
many people. Um, but one of the things I want to say in terms of so doing our own work, healing ourselves, making ourselves more loving, more kind, more patient, more cooperative, more um, tolerant people, more accepting people, is actually a contribution that we can all make. We can all do that. We can all have a part in
Yeah.
healing our country, one person at a time. But I want to talk a little bit, because it really struck me as so powerful, because it's so in line with what I've learned as a psychotherapist, is the truth and reconciliation model that was implemented in South Africa. And I did a little bit of reading about it, and and so I'm not an expert in it, but what I read really spoke to a big change that I think we need to see happen, and that is that, given that it was imperfect and it didn't do everything it needed to do, and there were some loopholes in it that left some things unaddressed,
Yeah.
um, the basic principle of bringing perpetrators and victims together
Mm.
to talk
Wow.
in a safe, which is what it did. Um, People who had acted out and been violent and hurt other people in South Africa were invited to come to the table and own what they had done,
Mhm.
with the promise of immunity. Okay,
Wow.
because they weren't going to come otherwise. Obviously, they weren't going to come
Sure.
otherwise.
Sure.
But what that forum created was a relatively, or safe enough, place where perpetrators could own what they had done,
Mm.
and they could hear the pain that they had inflicted on their victims. So victims and perpetrators both spoke. Victims told what had happened to them and the horrible things that they had suffered. And so it was a space where it was safe enough for the people who had harmed others to actually hear the impact of their behavior, and
Wow.
for victims to have a safe place to actually be heard without being further targeted. And the reason why I think that model is so profound and so that we could work with it here or anywhere
Hmm.
is because one of the things that I learned as a therapist, and I don't think this is the average person's understanding at all, and this is why, I say education is such a big part of this,
Right.
is that inside every perpetrator is a victim
Yeah.
that didn't get healed,
Yeah.
that didn't have a chance to have a safe life or healthy role models or be treated fairly or something.
Wow.
And one of the ways that people adapt to being mistreated by other human beings, unfortunately, is to become that dominator themselves. Not everybody does that, for sure,
Sure. Sure.
but many people do. And it's still a normal response to abnormal behavior,
And
you
how was
know?
that response, or how did the success rate work for them? Like when they had the had them come together, was it a little level of healing? Did they see a change? Did see kind of a level of growth or anything that really happened for the people?
That would be a good question. I don't know the answer. I would
Mm.
have to do some follow-up research on what the outcome was or if any of that model is still used today.
Yeah.
Um, but what really spoke to me about it was that in providing safety for a perpetrator to speak what they had done and hear the consequences, that's
Hmm.
actually a model of therapy.
Yeah.
There are models of therapy, for instance, with sexual abuse, where the person who has abused someone and the person they abused are together in a room with a therapist, and the
Mm.
person who has been violated speaks their pain and tells their truth, and the person who hurt them is there to listen and really hear it, and hopefully to feel in that safe space, to feel remorse and to feel the consequences of what they did. Because what we need to know is that many people, even people who have done terrible things, can be rehabilitated. They can be brought back to health and well-being and become safe people in our society if we were able to see them, especially to see the victim inside them
Hmm.
and to see the essence that's underneath all of it, because we were all born innocent, pure human beings as infants. Nobody was born a rapist or a
No.
murderer.
No.
That we weren't. We learned these things, and that essence is still inside every single one of us. And I believe that. And as a therapist, we learn how to speak to that, because otherwise there's no healing. If I just see you as the terrible things you've done, or you see me as the terrible things I've done, what chance is there for me to heal? I'm still absorbing that terrible mirroring. Do I need to be accountable? Is there healing I might need to do?
Sure.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
So there's some balance between holding people accountable and also seeing them as redeemable and worthy of rehabilitation and care and concern for what happened that set them up to do the things that they did that were harmful. And that's a
Now,
whole other lens on our society, right?
well, I was going to say, Phyllis, I mean, nowadays we have the cancel culture where it's kind of like you do one wrong thing and that's it. And I'm not saying that what you did was correct or right on any level,
Right.
but
Right.
we don't have, it's crazy. We talk about how we have rehabilitation efforts for alcoholism, drug rehabilitation, all these other rehabs that we have available. But to what you're saying is, it's almost to the point where, like, there are some people who maybe got canceled and they had some talks and had some self discovery with themselves and learned from their mistakes and moved on from that. But I do think we have such a shield up in America where it's do or die. You did it one time, that's it. Maybe did it
Mm-hmm.
twice, maybe did it three times, whatever the case is. You don't get a redemption value at that point. You're just automatically written off as this person. But I do think I do agree with you that there's some people who are hurt and who have done things that can be redeemable, but it takes that accountability to talk about those things and be able to own up to that. But also there needs
Mhm.
to be programs, education to how to understand how that happens. I don't, like you said, I don't think anyone was born that way. I think it was just levels of people not being raised the correct way and going back to, like you said, those American values and everything else, and just kind of being left to the wind.
Right.
And I would respect someone fully if they just sit out and say what happened to them. How did you get here? How did
Mhm.
this happen for you? How did you come to this? And level of remorsefulness is a key too.
Right.
It that's a good sign as well. Know that you're not a full off bad human being,
Right.
but you have a level of remorse of what you did and what happens. Because, like you said earlier, if you don't have remorse, then that is a sign of I don't know if it's a sign of a psychopath
Right.
or a therapist, but
Right.
I would think that
Right.
there's different signs that go into that. But if there's a level of remorse and there's a level of coming back and doing that, then I think we should as a society learn to be open to that. Not to say you have to fully let them in all, okay, yes, I'll let you fully all
Right.
in.
Right.
But I think there should be levels of understanding and growth. And I think it takes time to do that and learn to take baby steps with that. You do that with friendships, you do that with anything else in your family and anyone else that happens to you. So why not the same for how we treat people in our society? That's why our jails are just
That's right.
ridiculous. It's just overcrowded, overpopulated. Then you cause more issues. You go to jail for some stuff that makes no sense. I'm sorry, I
Right.
think going to jail for marijuana makes no sense to me. It's not
No
that bad of a
sense.
drug. But whatever. But it's like you're not fixing the problem. You're not fixing
Exactly.
you're just
Exactly.
repeating about it. And you're being
Exactly.
thrown and shunned away. But then I think people think, okay, well, this should teach you a lesson. Don't be an awful person. This is what happened to you. But when we talk about mental health and mental illness, we talk about certain things. Some people can't help that. They mean people have psychosexual issues. There's people who have trauma that happens. They don't want to be this way, but there's things that happen. I mean, I remember watching
That's
the
right.
Ted Bundy videos, and I was like, horrible person for what he did, obviously. But you understood the backstory, and you're like, whoa, that
Mhm.
all is trying to piece together and see how
Mhm.
all these things had come together to make him be who he was.
Right. And
You
there
know,
are lots of really great documentaries out there that chronicle some of the lives of, people who are in prison without parole for murders they
yeah,
committed. And then
yeah,
they talk about their childhood and it's so traumatic. Their childhoods were
mm,
so traumatic, and they witnessed murders, or their mother was killed in
yeah,
front of them, or they
yeah,
were abandoned in a shack in the woods when they were 9 years old. Um, and what do we expect? What
yeah,
would have happened
yeah.
to me if those things had happened to me? Who would I be?
Of
And I think
course,
we need to grow that empathy that
yes, that's
that
the word.
when horrible things happen to people, of course they're going to be symptomatic. They're
Yeah,
going to be. And we have to know that and have some kind of empathy. Even if someone is not going to ever get out of jail, they still deserve to be treated like a human being because they are.
absolutely, absolutely.
And I just want to return to here, and this is the big argument for like why our resources need to go to our families. Because if
Oh,
we help families and we help parents, if a parent has mistreated a child, give them treatment. Help them restore safety and love and connection with their children. And their children won't emerge from that home as the next, thief or felon or gang member or,
yeah,
person hurting or hurting other people. So we have a social responsibility to take care of one another if we
yeah,
really want to see crime diminish and people be more, a greater success and more of a contribution in our society. We all have that responsibility, and to just keep
still,
labeling people
yeah.
and, having them be throwaway human beings is a tragedy, and it's a sign of our collective mental unwellness. It really
It
is.
really is. No, I do agree with you, and it's so sad because at the same time, I do feel that people agree with some of the statements that we're saying, but because society has put such a label that it's so bad to say that, or it's, oh no, you can't go for that person what they did, and it's almost like you're afraid to speak up and say something.
Right.
You're afraid
Right.
to have those understandings and those thoughts, and that's where the shunness and this different ideologies come out with some people, and it's like we got to stop that cycle as well too. not trying to make everyone else happy and make everyone else in your society great. Of course, protect your family. Of course, protect what you want to protect. But also know that we're all human. We're all people. We
Mm-hmm.
all are hurting. We're all going through certain things. We have to learn to connect and stop, going for hatred first. And I think that's really one
Right.
of the things that's very hard on the side. It's like the first thing what it is, I want to hate. Oh, you did this. I want to hate you for this. I want to
Mm-hmm.
show violence, tit for tat. That's what I want to do. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what does that really do for you? Yeah, in a moment, sure, maybe it felt great.
Right.
All right, but long term, you just put this being on another human being who had obviously may hurt you or someone in your family as well too. But that tit for tat doesn't really help any healing. It doesn't help any growth.
Right.
You
It
just go
doesn't.
back and forth. It just goes back and forth. Um, I think of a time that we had some things happen in our family, and we had death, and this and that. And my sister, she was murdered by her boyfriend,
Oh.
and we had to think like long and hard about this. No signs, nothing happened. Domestic violence obviously is a huge thing. No one talks about it. No one knows what happens. It's always on the surface. Never know. And we were in the courthouse. I was talking to my dad about it, and I just was like, I want to hate this person for the rest of my life for what he did to my sister. I want to just sit up here and say, you're just an awful human being. I want you dead. I want you to feel the pain that I'm feeling right now. And I had to sit back to myself and think, and everyone else around me is feeling the same exact way. My father, cousins, family, everyone's feeling the same exact way. We lost someone important to us because of the acts of violence this person done. And then we go back to the stories. We go back to what happened with him. We go back to his history. And it becomes this whole thing of it was very dark. And the one thing I would always say about my sister was she was always a person. And I don't think, regardless of how I look at it one way or another, she would always be in the place to be like, I want to help others. I want to still be there for someone. Regardless of what that would take for herself. You want to call that a martyr, you want to call it what you want to say, she would always want to help someone. And in that moment, when we were in that courthouse and hearing all these things, I let it go. All that hatred, I let it go. And I said, what I'm going to do is help people who are in that same situation not be in that situation. So any
Right.
people I know, there's in a domestic violence situation or anything like that, I want to get the help they need. If you need to come to my house, you need to come talk to me. I want to be there for you. Because for me, that's my level of healing. Because I'm not seeing this happen again to someone else. I'm taking this
Right.
tragedy that happened in my life to not have this happen to someone else and know that you're not alone in this process. It doesn't have to always be a tragic thing that happens, but I do think we need to have some sort of resources for people. And if I can't be the person to give you the resource, I'll make sure you have the resources for you to do that. You know, and that's what you have to do. I think sometimes you have to really remove yourself. We're so egotistical as human beings sometimes, and as just a society, you gotta learn to just take yourself out of the equation. Think about the overall picture of this. I
Well,
mean, this
one of the
man's gonna
things
rot
that
in
you
jail for what he did.
right.
He's gonna rot for what he did. I know that,
Right.
but
And he has to live with what he did,
that's
and
what he did.
hopefully he finds some kind of healing in
Yeah.
himself wherever he is. But I think two things that stand out for me for what you said. One is that you took your pain and
Mm.
you transformed it into a higher purpose.
Yes.
And that's one of the role models that we really need in our society. We can
Yeah.
all do that. And especially if there are people role modeling that for us around us, it really helps because that's actually part of healing, is to transform our pain into some
It
other
is.
purpose that's
It is.
constructive. And we can role model that, we can teach that, we can show people, we can be that ourselves. And again, I just want to come back to, the best prevention is not guns. The best
No.
prevention is
No.
not
No.
prison. The
No.
best prevention is not hatred. It's not bigotry. It's not an eye for an eye. Those things are not preventative. They
No.
they actually continue the cycle of abuse. The best prevention is to help heal our society and our families as quickly and as early on as possible.
Yes.
Children who have intervention early in their lives have the best chance of being safe, contributing, loving members of our human family. And that's where our resources need to go. They
Yeah.
need to go to our families because we could stop these cycles. We could change if we
Sure.
had the will.
Yeah.
And I
Our
think
family.
part of what go ahead.
No, I was saying. You're right. The family is the number one heart of that, and I had to have talks with my father, before he passed. And I said, you want to be, I understand you're hurting. I know this is devastating, but at some point, I think he raised us a lot better to not let that happen. Of course, have your grief, have your pain. I'm never going to say take that
Right,
away.
right, absolutely.
Never nothing like that. But know that we have to do better with how we react to that.
Mhm,
And it, that kind of, bonded us for a little bit to be able to understand that and help that. And my dad just learned to be more helpful after that, and just he
mhm.
didn't want to see it happen to anyone else's child. He
Right,
did what he could do to be there for other people,
that's beautiful.
So I was very proud of him for that, but because that was very hard, devastating. It was hard for all of us. But
Oh, of
like I said,
course.
it's just taking those steps to do that, and that family. So I take the family dynamic and be like, if I can do it for myself, I can do it for someone in my family, I can do it for another member of my family.
Mhm,
We can find this level of structure and healing to kind of come together, to really
mhm,
get through something. And I think sometimes some tragedies do bring families closer together. And I think in this
mhm,
instance, stuff like this kind of brought our family a lot closer in a sad,
mhm,
tragic way.
mhm.
It really helped us heal in a way together.
And that's one of the things I hope for the family. I call it the family of America. That's one of the things that I hope for the family of America. But I think we have a long way to go because
Yes.
we still have people in positions of enormous power and influence who
Mm.
are so injured themselves,
Yep.
who are so on the aggressor side of the spectrum that
Yep.
they have free reign to act out on too many people. And I think
Absolutely.
it's up to us to be informed and to vote differently and to,
Yep.
find people who want to run for office who have some kind of basic human value and an understanding of this whole cycle of violence, who are actually committed to stopping it. And right now, unfortunately, just like in abusive families, you mentioned an important thing is that you said sometimes people are afraid to speak up. They don't want to kind of go against what's being said in
Hmm.
society. Well, people are afraid to speak up in abusive families, and that renders them powerless to affect any kind of change. And so
Yeah.
we have to support there being many voices at the table and tolerate listening to different points of view, and
Yeah.
also calling out the disturbance that we're seeing, the addiction to power, the addiction to wealth, the
Yeah.
addiction to greed, the
Yeah.
addiction to righteousness that is somehow um, forming some of the environment of the family of America that's devastating to so many people. And I think the challenge is to call that out without hatred, but to
Yeah.
call it out for what it is. This is collective mental disturbance, and we can do something about it. We don't
Okay.
have to hate to do something about it. We can call it out for the purpose of healing. And I think that's our big challenge.
I agree with you,
One of them.
Phyllis. Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for just this enlightened conversation, and tell us more about your upcoming book. Is there any place that people can learn more about you, about
Yeah.
psychotherapy or anything? Is there a website I can let everyone
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and my book is available for pre-order, so please go ahead and buy it now. Um,
Perfect.
and you can buy it off of my website or from Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's on all the major booksellers. It's just not quite available yet.
Okay.
But my website is www.phyllisleavitt.com, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I have lots of videos on YouTube. I have blogs and videos on my website, lots and lots of information. You feel free to absolutely contact me. You can contact me through my website. I'm happy to talk to anyone about anything. Um,
I don't know,
yeah.
Phyllis. You might be getting a lot of calls. You got to be careful.
I'm happy for that. I'd be happy for that, really, because like yourself, I want to do my part
Yeah.
in making this a better world for my children, my grandchildren, and really all people and all children everywhere.
Yeah.
Because if we let ourselves feel it, there's really a lot of suffering going on that we could interrupt. We could heal if we had the will, if we had the understanding, if we had the knowledge and the skills. Um,
Yeah, I agree. No, I totally agree. And we definitely gotta work on that in our society. We gotta work on that with our youth today and tomorrow, and lead them in the right direction, guide them, and just it
mhm,
takes us setting that example, or at least
right.
being like, don't do what we do. Well, as I tell my niece and nephew, I mean, don't have to do everything I did, but you
Right.
know, it's definitely leading
Hmm.
by example, but also realizing that we're in an ever
Right.
evolving world, and then learn to be adaptable to that change and that growth
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
instill that into them.
And
You
it's
know,
evolving really fast. And I
very
think
fast, a lot
one of
faster.
the,
These kids are picking up everything like I don't know what. Like I'm like, okay,
like me too, like I
yeah,
don't even
yeah,
know.
yeah. I'm like,
But I think we have to really sit down and think about how we choose to use the technologies that we have, how we
yes,
choose to use our understanding of psychology, that we don't use it to manipulate people, we
no,
use it to help
no,
heal.
yeah. That's really true too. Yes, absolutely. Do not manipulate. Use for the better good. Same I say about AI, but we'll see how that works out for people. But well, Phyllis, thank you again for being on with us. It was such a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
And
Thank
feel free
you.
to come back anytime. And we're looking forward to the book. It sounds like it's going to be really great for everyone out there. And um, get that healing started. And hope is still alive.
Thank
Hope
you.
is well and alive.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. You are a good testimony to that yourself.
I
So
try.
thank you. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.